Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's An Hour with the Experts webinar. I'm Maggie Neff. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Simmons Associates, and on behalf of the entire Simmons team, I want to thank you all for being here this evening. Tonight, we're diving into the current state of the veterinary practice sales market. When we talk to owners when we're out and about, we often hear the same questions. Are corporates still buying? What can I expect in terms of multiples and cap rates? Is the private practice ownership trending toward a resurgence? How can I make my practice attractive to buyers, whether corporate or private? We hear these questions and more. In tonight's session, Sean Coyle, our president of Northeast Sales, will answer all these questions while giving you a reliable framework for reference for today's practice market sales. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to type them in the Q&A, which is located at the bottom of your screen, and we will answer them during the webinar. We also will reserve some time at the end to take additional questions as time permits. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Sean to begin his presentation.
Okay. Thank you, Maggie. All right. So yes, here we're talking about the state of the market in the first quarter of 2026, which is incredible because I keep writing down 2025 everywhere and thinking that's where we are. But it is 2026. So tonight, trying to keep this to about 45 minutes. So that will leave us 10 to 15 minutes of questions, answers at the time, and then being respectful of time of everybody. So we'll be done at 8 o'clock. So a little bit about myself. I've been helping and working with veterinarians for over 15 years. Before I joined Simmons, I had worked with veterinarians on the buying side. I'd helped associates buy practices, owners buy second offices, expand startups, things along that lines. Worked with Simmons for years. In 2021, I took over the Northeast. And then in 2024, I also expanded to the Southwest. So I help people in New England, New York, and Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico. So it kind of gives me a good look across the country of what's going on in different pockets. Since I'm not a veterinarian, I think it's always required to show a picture of your dogs when you're speaking, just to say, hey, look, I do work. I not only do I work with veterinarians, but I love animals. But the reason why I really show them is also, when I'm talking bits of advice and giving them to them, owners, I say I come from two different perspectives that I try to give. I try to give the perspective of what I've learned in the industry, seeing best practices in practices, things that didn't work out. And then I also try to give advice as an owner of pets and as a client of veterinary hospitals. What do I see when I'm in there and I take off kind of the business hat? I often also send my wife in. So I look at it from her perspective and I ask her a lot of questions so I can share what I see and what she really thinks and pass on that advice. And having two labs, it seems that we deal with the vet a lot because they love to eat things, but thank God we have 2 feet of snow, so they can only eat snow right now. So our objective tonight is kind of understand the current market forces, both real and perceived, and how they influence practice value, maybe some strategies to strengthen your practice position in the market. And maybe we'll be able to apply some practical approaches for ensuring a smoother transition and maximizing that value, minimizing risk, and honoring all the work that you have built. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about the buyer mindset. We're going to talk a little bit the difference between the private versus the corporations. I'm going to give some advice, and then I'm going to cover a few more things just quickly, some contract stuff. And then hopefully if we have time in the end, I also like to talk about how do I prepare for this. So why is the buyer's mindset very important? Because at the end of the day, they're the ones who are going to be paying to purchase the practice, whether it's private or a corporation. Ultimately, they will determine the price of the practice because they have the check, the bag of money that they'll be giving it to you. We'll talk about, and as you've heard on previous stuff, you have valuations, um, things along that lines. You have an idea what your cash flow is, and we kind of use that, and people will say the value of it. But the true worth of something is only determined when you sell it. In fact, you'll know the exact value of the practice. The value of your practice is when you sell it, because short of that, you're just guessing. So buyers are very important when it comes to that, and they help determine that value because they are going to be the ones who are going to pay for it. So, we talk about the two aspects, the supply and the demand, and we're kind of really focusing on the demand factors because the supply is what it is. And, at some point, everyone's going to have to retire and sell it. So if we understand what the buyers want, we're going to be better prepared for it and thus maximize our value. So let's talk about the buyer's mindset on the private side right now. We used to say work-life balance, and I'm sure we've all heard that term. I have now flipped that in my slides and called a life-work balance. So that is something we've seen change, obviously dramatic since I've started in this industry, where that's become a real focus. And I think it's important that we've changed the words from work life to the life work, because that is now seen as the primary driving the buyer's mindset on the private side. Is really the first question they're asking themselves is, how does this affect my life? Is this going to make it more complicated? How is this going to affect everything else in it? My free time, my happiness. This is really driving their mindset. The next question they ask is, how can they afford this? I mean, this has been a question that's been asked for since ever I've been in the industry, and I'm assuming going back before I was in the industry. When you look at buyers, you have to remember associates, they're carrying a lot of debt. They had issues when they went to get a mortgage, when they went to buy a car. This is something we've been talking about for years. And so, when they're buying a $40,000 car or buying a $450,000 house, if the process was grueling and it was tough to get approved for a loan and they're figuring out how they could afford that, when you come to them and say, hey, you want to buy a practice for $1 million, $1.5 million, $2 million, you start including real estate, they begin to take that and they say, oh, that was like buying a house. That was very challenging. So they question, can I afford this? So they often don't understand the concept of how, you get into, and we're not going to talk about buying a practice tonight, but how the practice supports the debt. But understanding that these are their fears is important when you have the conversations with them, that it can be often brought up to them proactively and explain to them how they can afford to buy the practice. A lot of the worry is also, who's going to help me? There's a lot of fear around that, saying, especially buying a single practice, is, hey, what happens on day one? If the owner's leaving, who's going to be around me? We, as a society, help is far more easier to get as the years have gone on. We often look at, the internet, but through that aspect, you can find help on demand at home. Hey, you need a plumber. You go on the internet, you quickly Google, I need a plumber, right? It'll tell you who's going to respond to you and right away, or 24 hours. So a lot of aspects of our life now, it's a lot easier to find help for things. Associates looking in this and saying, where do I find that help? Who's going to help me? So there's this great fear around them about this, is who's going to help me own this practice? Can I be successful? And, what happens on the bad days? Who can I reach out to? Now, this has changed a lot, I would say, in the last 3 years, which we never really, you worried about it, but a little bit, and then sounds kind of funny. Do I like the look of the clinic? The 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when I was helping people buy clinics and I was on that side, that question would come up. But it was like, hey, we'll we'll help you, we'll get you additional funds and we can put you in contact with a contractor and we can do all these plans and you can shape it, the clinic, into the way you like it. That mentality has kind of changed. With the supply of clinics being available has gone up. The way your clinic looks is becoming more important to them. It kind of sends a message when they walk through the door and says, hey, is this a place I'm going to want to own? They are looking, kind of looking up above those questions is who's going to help me in that life work balance. The look of the clinic can affect that. Hey, I'm going to have to put more. They begin to think, if the clinic is not up to par, do I need to put more work into this clinic? Is this going to consume me because it's not exactly what I think? Then they begin to think maybe stuff's outdated, practices are outdated, and it begins to stress them. So in a situation like that, how do we offset that when you're not going to do people say, oh, do I have to redo my whole clinic? And the answer is no. But certain things become more important. How often do you have your clinic repainted? Is it, first of all, is it clean the moment you walked in? Every night before you go home, are people picking up and cleaning things? When you come into the lobby, is that moment, does it send a bright kind of message to people, like a welcoming environment? The color, the ceiling lighting, the chairs. Do you have posters up on the wall that have been up there 10 or 15, or not 10, for 2 to 3 years, 4 years old, with stuff that's kind of outdated or maybe fading a little bit? These messages are sending to the buyers the moment they walk into your clinic and saying, is this something I want to own? So be very aware of that when you're in your clinic. The next time you're in there, it's like, hey, we're not asking for a major renovation, but it needs to be updated. And that goes through the whole thing as you walk through your equipment, everything in the back. Does this send a message? Flooring, that is this going to be something that somebody wants? And we have seen, I think, more startups occurring because of the stuff we just talked about, the life work, who's going to help me, and do I like the look of the clinic? When we have associates who want to become owners, much like everything on demand nowadays, they want to become owners pretty quick. So they've lost that patience of waiting to buy a practice. And they're now saying, you know what? If I can't find what I want right away, why don't I just start up? I can build the life work balance I want. I'm going to build the team from scratch who's going to help me. And the clinic's going to look exactly like the way I want to. So we are seeing, or obviously we don't do startups, but we are seeing more clinics popping up because people, they can't find those previous boxes aren't being checked. I will say that, and we'll talk about the multiples in a minute, and the 1 and 2 doctor practices, but the big question now, as we're in this private mindset, is, are we going to see the 2026 market better than the 2025 market as far as private sales go? I would say, coming out of 2025, talking to my colleagues and myself and looking at the deals and the stuff we have listed now and the activity that we're getting on it, the answer is yes. We are in an upward trend. We're definitely a lot better than we were in 2024, 2023, and 2022. Where we'll end up, not sure, but it is trending up in the right way. We are seeing a healthier private market, and we do see people buying, the 1 and 2 doctors. But the ones we're seeing are answering these questions: the life work balance. How can I afford this? I'm sorry. We'll get into that with the numbers, but the looks of the clinics, these are all answering, those questions are all being answered for them, and those clinics are being sold. Just kind of a more popular clinics, I guess you could say, that we see being sold, I've noticed, is back to life work on the private market, is you're seeing these, I don't want to say 4 day a week, where clinics are open Monday through Thursday, Tuesday through Friday. They're no longer open nights. Saturdays are gone. It's no longer a requirement of being a successful veterinary practice. You don't need Saturday hours. And the owner really cutting down to 4 days so they're not overly stressed about it. We don't see this affecting the businesses. I've had clinics make this conversion and it has not affected their bottom line one bit. Clients aren't, and people can say, "Oh no, my clients would revolt." They would revolt initially, and then they'd be fine. They're used to it. I don't like to compare to other industries, but I will in certain situations. And I often compare this to dentists, right? I mean, most dentists are working 3 to 3.5 days a week max. They make these hours work. They are seeing this in other aspects of healthcare. So having a 4-day week practice um, is not going to affect you. Your clients will accept it. You are seeing that when they start up that they're doing that. So don't be afraid, and we don't have time to get into large advice tonight, but maybe at the end I can talk a little bit about more of that. The corporate mindsets. What are they looking at in this current market? It used to be revenue growth. It was very simple. We would look at, hey, back in 2022, you'd look at your revenue from 2020 to 2021 to 2022 and say, did it grow all 3 years? And if it did, they'd be like, that's great. They would dig in due diligence, but that was it. They're just looking for revenue growth. They were looking for profit growth, and all that was happening. As an industry, things were expanding. I'm sure we've all heard and we've all felt it because the stats are out there. IDEX has put them out there. VetStats has put them out there when the software that monitors the software. Is the first question that we often get, and now that we look for, is what are the visits doing? What did your visits in 2025 look like compared to 2024? What do they look month over month? What was your trend in the second half of the year? Where are they currently for the last 3 months? Visits are a key indicator, probably the number one indicator right now, because your revenue can go up and can simply go up because you raise prices. And 2-3 years ago, that was fine for the corporations. It no longer is. It's visits. As we know, depending on the stats you're looking at, you can say visits were probably down nationally about 2% last year, which what I would almost call flat. So most clinics are coming out of that year, 2025, as being flat in visits. So what does your trend look like the last 3 months of the year? And what are you doing to increase your visits in 2026? Do you have a plan? Those questions are being asked by the corporations now. The next thing is they're really asking is how stable are the associates? They don't want to buy a place because they've learned their lesson, where they go in and they have to, 2 years down the road, they've lost the associates because they've moved on, they've decided to start a family, things along that lines. So looking at each associate and identifying how stable they are and their likelihood to stay in the practice for 1, 2, 3, 4 years is a common question that we hear, and being able to explain why they aren't going to leave you is far more important. The next thing, and unfortunately, you as an owner can't control this, is how recruitable is the area you are in. I do know of corporate groups that do that, is when you bring them and say, hey, I have a party interested in selling. You bring it to their business development team, and then almost right away, it goes to, depending on where it is, it can go to their recruiting area. And before we really get involved in it, the recruiting area can give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down and say, all right, well, no, we're going to be able to recruit doctors here. Or they might say, we're not going to be able to recruit doctors here. Unfortunately, there's nothing you can do about that. The next is, how long does an owner plan on staying? Obviously, the longer you can give an owner, someone who's going to buy, the longer an owner can give the group that's buying them a plan for them staying on, the better they're going to feel about it. We all, and which we've seen, it used to be able to get out in a year or 2 years. And now what we prep owners for is 3 to 5 years. Are there situations where people get to leave earlier than 3 years? Yes. Hey, I've worked myself out. Do they find a replacement? Yes. That's going to get you out in less than 3 years. But bringing it to market and saying we need to get the owner out there as soon as possible really devalues the asset, because the people buying it are going to begin to get worried about it. So that your ability to stay longer, which then gets into your planning of when you want to sell, is going to help increase the value of the clinic. Another question we hear often, or what they look at, is, are they going to be a good partner? And at the end, we're going to talk a little bit more about mindset, hopefully, if we have the time. But even if they're buying, there's a couple of different models, and we're not going into the models tonight, the Q1, but I think everyone's probably going to be familiar. There's different deal structures. Are they, there's 100% sales where they're buying you in cash and stock, and then there's joint ventures. But however they're buying you and what percentage they're actually buying you at, they're still looking at and calling you a partner now. And that's, another thing that's changed over the last 3 years, and it's becoming more and more prevalent, is they're looking at you and saying, are you going to be a good partner? Are you going to help keep this together? Are you going to help us recruit associates when we bring them in the door? Are you going to help us grow this practice? How are you going to be with helping us retain the associates? During this whole process of it, how did you act to them? Were you happy that you were, partnering with somebody? Or were you just looking, and they all understand that you were looking for just a way out, because everybody has to retire at some point. But if you present yourself as looking to be a partner and being a good partner, that's going to help drive the value of it. And much like what we talked about on the private side, is also is what condition is of the building, and can I expand it? So the condition of the building kind of gets into multiple other things with them, and why that becomes important. Just like the other ones, it kind of tells them going on is, first of all, we've talked about recruitability, because they have to replace you at some point. If the building is in great condition, how are they going to recruit new associates to come work there? If you haven't been keeping the building up and in good condition, they're going to look and say, have you really been taking care of your associates? So truly, how stable are your associates? And then also along the good partner line. Well, when you were on your own, you weren't reinvesting and caring about the practice. How do we expect now that we partner with you that you're going to continue to do that? So your building now kind of tells them a story about how it's going to be working with you. So back to just like on the private side, your condition of your building from the moment someone pulls in the parking lot to take a tour of it is going to begin to tell them a message of all these things that they're worried about. It might also explain, like, why aren't your visits? Why are you down more than everybody? Why are you flat? Why aren't you growing? Because they're looking at it and saying, hey, maybe people don't want to visit you. Maybe you're losing clients also because they don't want to come in here because you've kind of given up. So the condition of your buildings become far more important than it has in previous years. And then the last part of that, along with the condition of the building, is they want to know, can they expand? All right, hey, everything else is checking the boxes, right? Your visits are up, stable associates, your recruiting area, you're going to be staying on a good amount of time, you're going to be a good partner. Can I expand it? That's always a tough question. But because you can be limited, hey, you have, you only have 4 walls, and sometimes you're just maxed out, right? So, but this is part of when you talk to them. If you bring them a plan on how you can add additional capacity. So is that either reworking your current clinic? Is that expansion of hours? Something along that lines. We've actually heard from more and more from some of the real estate groups that actually buy practices that, these practices have been known for 5 or 6 years by corporations that are doing quite well, is them actually moving and expanding. So understanding how you can expand your office. And so when you're talking to these corporations, you bring that plan to them. It's no longer, hey, let you think about it. You come up with an idea. I'm going to give you an idea how you can expand the capacity, thus answering the question, am I going to be a good partner for them? So, what's that dividing line between the private and the corporations, and what do they really look for in that first market, right? In the current Q1 market of 2026. So let's talk about what the corporations are looking for. Obviously, it's still a multi-doctor. They really want to be 3+. Do 2+ doctor practices get bought by corporations? Yes, they do. There's just a few more boxes that need to be checked. So it is the multi-doctor, and they want to see the revenue in line with it, right? I mean, the number I would give you really realistically, and probably give you, if you're at three FTE, which are full-time equivalent doctors, I mean, they're going to look at 1.5 million, but you really want to be over 2 million. If you have three full-time doctors, right? That's them producing at least 600 to 650. And then you have, anywhere from 5 to 10% of what we call non-doctor production. If you checked all the boxes, you're a multi-doctor and, you're doing the revenue that they're looking for. It's a great market right now. There's still a lot of groups out there. They're still very aggressive. The multiples have gotten a wide ranging because of, obviously, there's boxes to check. They understand if it's in a harder recruitable area that they're not going to be paying as much. If you're more near the end of the career, they understand that too. That can all affect the multiple. That's why we kind of give a very large range right now, 10 to 14. Multiple of the bottom line. Do we see more than that? Yep, I've seen deals more than that. Could you see less to a corporate? Yeah, I mean, they're going to swoop in there. It's the right situation. And they might be able, because they know no one else is going to look, but it could fit their portfolio. So they might buy it, they might be the only bidder. And if they realize that, then you might be in that 8 to 10. But I would say right now your multiples are still in that 10 to 14 range, which is a very wide range. But all those factors that we talked about come into play. The private, the 1 to 2 doctor, is, as I said, the market's getting healthier. It doesn't really affect the multiples like it does on the private. Those have kind of stayed consistent over the years. It seems, the average of that falls about 5 times its earnings. In a scenario like that, this is sometimes when I feel averages are kind of out of whack because, and what I mean, or using the term average, statistically, there's a couple of different things you can look at, the mean, which is the average, the mode, the medium, things along that lines. That theory goes behind when they quote housing prices. They don't quote the mean, they quote the median. Because there's what they call the deviation from the average can be significant. And I'm finding that in the private doctor range, which means I've done deals up to 7 multiple. That seems to work on a private, but those are highly desirable practices in great urban areas, doing well, growing, things along that lines. As you get less desirable and move down the line and the buyer market shrinks, you're seeing that multiple really, or I've seen it dip below that, and you get into some rural areas. We've all heard the stories of practices closing because they can't find a buyer. If you're in a tougher environment to sell, and you had a choice between getting a 3.5 multiple and closing your doors, you're going to take the 3.5 multiple all the day. All that information goes into the averages, obviously the 7s, the 3s, and you come up with a 5. But I would really put that, much like the corporations, I'd put that range into 4 to 6. I do see, as I said, we do see the demand for these picking up and buyers coming on. Just because more buyers are coming on the market, because the supply is there, you're not going to see a change in the multiple. So it will continue to do that. A common question we get is, how long does it take to sell a private practice? Oh, that can vary. I mean, you get into, as I said, all those questions we asked. It can be 6 months to sell it. It could be 3 years. Each practice is different based on answering all those questions. And that time seems to be growing. So if you are, a 1 to 2 doctor and you're thinking about retiring the next 3 years, now might be the time to begin to look to sell because you're going to always be able to work. You just don't know if the right buyer pops up, and if there's only going to be 1 or 2 buyers, how long it will take for them to show up.
Hey,
Um,
Sean,
yes.
I just want to interject here for a moment. We have a question. We're wondering, what about multiples for a specialty practice?
Okay. So multiples on a specialty practice. Um, so that kind of gets into delving into a little bit deeper on. So if we're just talking a specialty standalone, there's actually now corporate groups looking at those. But do you have a backup plan to replace yourself? Because as opposed to GP, where you have a lot of doctors out there to replace you, if you're in a specialty and you have, and you're looking at one point to retire you, is how many specialists do you have? I mean, you can go to these centers, right? And let's take where people are board certified in dentistry, right? And if you have multiple doctors board certified in dentistry for you, you're going to get a good multiple in it. You're going to get in the teens. But if you're a specialist and that's just you and you're, by yourself, or there's maybe just two of you, you're going to get, are you going to get a double digit multiple? Because the question is, how do you replace it? It goes back to recruitability. So the specialty, market is kind of, you really have to look at it individually, and you're going to get really wide ranges. And then based on the specialty, obviously, there's some specialties that are easier to recruit, surgeons, internists, things along that lines, where if you're in oncology and it's just you by yourself, finding an oncologist is not always the thing. So the specialty market is very in flux. And is it part of, is it a part of a GP? Is it part of a specialty ER hospital? Things along that lines. Those are all going to affect it. So I'd give a much larger range on that and saying, yeah, you're probably getting in anywhere from the 8 to the 14, but it comes back to the ability to replace the specialist, how many specialists you have, and where I've seen successful ones are, do you have where you're helping people get, do you have an internship where you're helping people also getting board certified to take you over? So there'll be a lot more questions going to the specialty market. But the good thing is groups are buying them. And there's actually groups that bought certain specialties that are expanding to buy them all. So that market is, I would say, good. Um, but each individual specialty is looked at far more. Um, really the difference between the private and the corporations, the time on the sale. A corporation sale can obviously go very quick. Going through the process, numbers, picking out due diligence, from time you bring it to market to time to close is, can be anywhere from, say, 6 to 8 months on average to do it properly. A private, it can take 6 months, it can take 3 years. As we said, the multiples, you're still getting double the multiple on the corporations versus the private. Location matters, obviously, in both. And then the difference between the two, obviously, your legacies when people talk about that, selling the difference between going to private and the corporations. Employees, in both scenarios, it's still, the concern is we still hear it about selling to corporations. My employees, aren't going to want to go with it. The corporations obviously have been very successful over the years of retaining them. They don't get rid of people. So as far as your employees and delivering the message to them, um, nobody's losing benefits, nobody's losing pay, time off. Usually things get added. So it is, as far as your employees in a corporate market, it's still a very good time for them in the transitions. So I don't know if we have any buyers on there. I do want to give some advice for giving a market update. for that. So people are looking some quick buyer advice out there. I want to remind the buyers that there's a lot of banks out there. And this could be if you're an owner too and you have an associate looking. Why I say there's a lot of banks out there and not to zero in on one is because each bank has their own credit criteria. So just because they'll approve you for one loan and they think you're a good buyer on another one doesn't mean they're going to approve you on the next loan to buy another practice. And that will often then say, oh, I can't, or this is not a practice worth buying because the bank wouldn't approve it for me. Well, you're going to find out maybe the bank doesn't want to approve it for you because of liquidity or loan to gross or something along that lines that doesn't meet their credit criteria. It has nothing to do with whether you're going to make enough money on it, whether it's worth it. It just might be because the bank, it's outside their credit box. So we see this often with buyers is I tell them like, hey, you need to talk to multiple banks and don't zero in on one until you have an approval because you'd be surprised. They might approve you on one, deny you on another, and then another bank might flip-flop that. It's just because it has to meet certain boxes that have to check for their credit and their, it gets into fair lending and all this other stuff. As I said, the big term we still hear from them is liquidity. Oh, we'll approve them for this, but we won't because of liquidity, which is your cash in your bank, which has nothing to do with the success of your practice other than something that they report to the government as fair lending. So buyers out there, please talk to a lot of banks. They're out there, they're lending. Rates are better than getting a mortgage on your home. So, okay, quickly, just in the last couple of minutes, let's just cover just a reminder, we're doing a market update. Just a couple of financial, things to go over when you're looking at your numbers. Your P&L and your taxes are heavily influenced by your tax strategy. That bottom line doesn't necessarily mean that's actually the profitability of your practice. So when all these groups look at your numbers or private buyers, they are rejuggling those numbers to see what you're truly earning. So you as an owner need to understand how much you're making as an owner and how much an associate does. And the type of entity also influences your bottom line. Gets into salary distributions, draws, comps. We hear, oh, I'm making X or Y. Someone might be thinking they're making X because it's a draw versus distribution versus salary. As I said, how you run your numbers is more based on tax reasons. Anyone buying a corporation or a private buyer is going to look at your numbers differently than you see them. And just you have to understand that. So we're not going to go really tonight. We're not going to go delve into this, but the term really just quickly going over this is your owner's discretionary cash flow. This is the true profitability of the business. It's not just the EBITDA, which we think the earnings before interest, depreciation, tax, amortization. We look at different things that we add back in, your owner's comp, your profit, retirement money can be added back in, if you're running stuff through your P&L, which is fine to do, family members, auto gets all added back into the business to really come up with a true profitability. And that's what it comes. That's what the multiple is based off of, is not really your EBITDA, but truly the earnings of the business. And that's something, a professional will help you determine what that is. I would also highlight in this market update a number that I know my colleagues and I talk about, or not a number, but an item that used to be in there that for a lot of times is now getting adjusted. We used to look at owner benefits, things like health insurance and certain percentage of the retirement planning. And all that used to be added back in 100% because you would say that's an owner's benefit. Well, an associate now can get their medical paid for by somebody else, right, as an associate. They can get healthcare and they can generally get 50% of their family's healthcare paid for. And they're going to get a 401k, right? And it's going to get matching anywhere from 4 to 5% of their salary. So what we've seen in this new market is when people are buying is they're looking and making sure in your numbers, besides having to add back in, that you're offering benefits not only to your associates, but your employees, because they're worried about them leaving. So if you have a lot of benefits in there for your employees, there can be a positive adjustment in there. Not that they're losing them, especially in a corporate transaction. It's just they can get them cheaper. But if you're not offering benefits to your employees, a private buyer who's getting those for free somewhere is not going to pay that as part of the multiple. In a corporation that has to offer that to your employees, they're going to retain it, is going to add a benefit charge to your cash flow. Um, you can say argue all day whether it's fair or not. That's what's happening right now. So that's a fairly new thing we've seen in the last year is this benefit charge. So obviously that can draw down your earnings a little bit. People don't understand the industry, especially CPAs will tell you, oh no, that's an owner's benefit. Well, back to the buyer's the one giving you the cash. If all the buyers are going to, put a benefits charge in there, there's nothing you can do to stop them, and they are now. So just be aware that you're going to hear that benefits term a lot more now in this market. If you want to improve your bottom line, it really comes down, I say, to two things. Your number one cost is your people. We used to say COGS, your cost of goods. I think, and we just all heard about the merger between MWI and Shine, and isn't pricing and things along that lines. But you still have major competitors out there besides them. And they've really driven down the cost of COGS, even though they've gone up with inflation. Those are two different things. They don't have the spreads they used to. Where one clinic was paying significantly more than another because of buying groups. So your COGS you can have better inventory control and things along that lines to drive down their prices, but your number one cost is still your people. And often we look at numbers and we say, oh, your people expenses are too high. It could be you're overstaffed, but often I've seen recently it's people have pricing issues. So I would implore everyone to go back and really look at your prices tonight and say, am I pricing this properly? Inflation has been rampant the last 2-3 years. People have raised their prices. You used to raise your prices 3 to 5% every year. I know in the last 2 years, I hear from owners, oh, I was really aggressive. I did 5, 7, some even 10%. And then you're like, well, yeah, but inflation's been running greater than that. You've had to increase your salaries of all your staff. Did you do that with your prices? Whether you like it or not, I find that owners were very good at increasing their pricing on their inventory costs, but they weren't doing well on increasing their pricing on service cost. And, you get, oh, no, I raised it X. I went on my exam room and I went $5 up or something along that lines. And then you look at the numbers and you say, well, the cost to have that person in the room, went up by $8. So when you raised it $5, you actually lost $3. Don't be afraid to raise your prices. Nobody's giving you a discount wherever you were. I know it's hard. I know I've read some things and people are talking about the cost of veterinary care and it's going up and up and up. But what are you supposed to do if your costs keep going up? You can't keep absorbing. No other industry in the world absorbs those costs. It gets passed on. And unfortunately, you're going to have to pass those on to your clients. You just have to be comfortable passing on those costs. If you're not comfortable, you can't expect your clients to be comfortable. A couple of things I just want to quickly go over. It's important to have contracts with your associates, and they can even be less contracts and just kind of more an employment understanding for the year. But having someone sign a piece of paper, regarding if there's anything really binding in there, is an important thing to have. That understanding with them will keep and retain people. So please update your contracts with your associates every year. If you hired them 3 years ago and you're like, oh, we're just rolling it over, nothing's changing, you still need to update it every year with them. Put a new date on there, look it over, make sure they're comfortable, review with them. It's a great time to review their annual performance and have a new contract. Even if you're in states where they're really not binding because there's no non-competes, still have them. They can leave you at any point, but you want to have that in writing and have them sign it. It's far more, it's easier to retain someone because they're probably going to come talk to you if they're really concerned about leaving, if they have a contract and something you may be able to fix with them so they don't leave you. Hey, I left you because of this. And you're like, oh, I would have done it with you, but now it's too late. Another question we hear often now is lab contracts. Can I renew them? What about selling them? Look, as long as you disclose the lab contract to the buyer before at the beginning of the discussions, they can be included because they're already included in the cash sale. Obviously, you should not be renewing it when you know you're going to be selling it in next year and that. But if you're in a 6 year contract, you don't have to wait to the 6 year to sell your practice. If you're in year 3 or even year 2, right, and you renewed it and you didn't think you were going to sell, but now you need to sell, it's okay. You're going to be able to sell that practice. It just needs to be disclosed. And if you disclose it, the first thing you do, you're going to have less issues. When you surprise people and say, oh, there's also a lab contract, you have to assume it. It does beget people to wonder, oh, is there anything else you're pulling on me? So don't worry about lab contracts. Just disclose them at the beginning. Quick couple bits of advice on how do you prepare. As I said, your mindset being a partner in this market. You should always have an exit strategy. Day one, you buy a business, have an exit strategy. Remember, you can't control the unknown. You can understand what's out there, but you can only control your reaction to it. I ask everybody, if you haven't done this, another thing I'm going to ask you at the end of the call is you need to take actions outside the office. Besides talking to somebody and understanding the value of it, please have an estate attorney. Have a plan for you if something happens to you. What happens if something happens to you if you're incapacitated? What happens if you die? These questions come up when that happens to you. If you don't have it in writing, your family members can't react as quick. We just had a recent situation, and it worked out very well because the owner had done this, had all this in writing. Unfortunately, they became incapacitated. There was someone able to step in right away and help us, contact us and help us sell it. We were able to sell it. As I said, it was unfortunate the owner eventually passed away during this process. But nothing was slowed down as far as selling the clinic because they had somebody in place, a plan in place. It was all written out. It was all legal. They were able to execute it. And because of that, the family was able to receive the money for the clinic instead of it being tied up in an estate, losing out on buyers and having the practice, close. Same thing as have a financial planner. Yes, the final sale of the practice is very important. It's a lot of money, but you should also be planning before that. Your sole financial plan shouldn't be the sale of your practice. That should kind of be the cherry on the top. How do you quickly prepare? Reach out to classmates, colleagues who are retired, ask them, talk to family or friends. Most importantly, why we're on here tonight is you be realistic, understand the market. Remember, it's the buyer who's giving you money to buy your clinic. They're going to dictate a lot of the terms. You choose whether you accept them, but the more realistic you are, the easier it's going to be able to make a deal. Remember, just because you sell your business doesn't mean you have to stop being a veterinarian. You'll always be able to practice, and no one's going to be telling you what to do. I know that's a great fear. I can't work for somebody else. You can produce and you can do it medically because it's under your license. You're always going to be able to work. A bit of advice crept up last year. I always say accrue vacation time. Another thing I'll throw out there, we've seen in some states, why I say that, especially at the beginning of the year, you're updating your employee handbook, it's written over. Some people give their vacation time to their employees all on day one. The problem you run into this is when you sell it and you sell in the mid-year, you owe them the entire year's worth of vacation, and they get the new ones. It's just a double dip for them. Make sure that your employees are always accruing vacation. They can go into the negative. You just want to make sure that they're accruing it and it's not given to them on day one, because that could cost you some money down the road when you go to sell because the vacation time is due. It's a change of ownership. I know we kind of sped up there at the end, but we're at 7:50. I do want to leave a few minutes for questions.
So again, if any of you have any questions, you can drop them in that Q&A box, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. You can type it in. There's even an option to ask anonymously if you prefer. So we'll just leave a little space here for you guys to type out any questions you might have. Okay, well, I'm just going to assume, Sean, that you were extra thorough and you left no room for questions. um, I want to thank you all again, everyone who attended. If you are looking for additional resources on the practice sales market or other practice ownership topics, I would recommend that you visit SimmonsInc.com and visit our Learning Center. We have lots of articles and ebooks and other resources that can help you navigate this topic as well as others. I'm going to pause because I actually see a couple questions and I'm going to pose those to you, Sean. The first is, what are your thoughts about corporate equity as part of sale and its value?
Okay. So that's, I'm assuming that you're taking on the stock. You always want to look at the cash portion of the sale as the most important. Um, Equity, it's part of the deal. It's not just, and it's hard because we compare it to what it was a couple years ago when it was all cash deals, right? So now we're looking at equity and we're like, oh, this is, a bad thing because we're comparing it to 3 years ago, right? And saying, I was getting all cash 3 years ago, and now I have to take 25 or 30% equity. But you have to look at it as the whole of the market. Um, and that's just what it is. In order to get the multiple, part of it is the corporate equity, right? So, and that's across all other industries have that. So now we have that in the veterinary industry. So it's something you just have to live with. Um, you kind of plan out with the cash of the deal, and then you got to look at. Then there's multiple factors of each group. Where are they in the recap? How strong are they? How are their other clinics doing? As I said, what are all their other requirements? And then you can use that compared to other deals, and then that's how you make a decision. Is it good? How you value it, I mean, that's, we could debate that all day. You definitely, when you're comparing it between two offers, I would say you definitely discount it based on kind of some of the outside factors that you would see of each group. And I have a tendency to rely heavily more on the cash portions of it. And so you multiple private sale, two doctor hospital. Could you repeat? Yes. It's a wide ranging multiple. Um, the average is 5. Um, I've seen, higher ones than that in really urban areas that are really, you know, um, actually those have been in multi doctors above a two doctor. You're probably really stopping at 6, but I'm going to use Boston as an example. That's a 6. If you were in a rural area in northern New England, or I'm out in Nevada. If you're outside of the Las Vegas and Reno, and you get in rural areas, that multiple might be a 4. So the factor of that comes in. A two doctor hospital also is kind of unique because if you're selling to your associate, how much are they producing? How long have we been there, and how much they really own of that? So you get a wider range of multiple in a two doctor, especially when it's an associate buying out and the owner's looking to go. You have to ask the question that is, how are you going to replace that? And then why are they paying for something that's irreplaceable? Um, so I would say, actually, weirdly enough, a one doctor is probably more stable because someone's coming in and buying that, and then they know that, hey, I'm taking that over. You get a little bit of wider range in the two, and I would say anywhere from a 4 to 6. How about equine practices for corporate? We really don't do equine. I've tried it over the years. We're so busy with the small animal. Um, there's a lot that go into it. I know there are some, but you're not going. All I can say is you're not going to get the multiple that you do on the small animal, on an equine. Also, because even though people can bring you equine to, are they? You still have to have mobile things along that lines, recruiting equine vets. It gets on that. So I do know it's a lower multiple on the corporate. It's just we don't get into it. Same thing on the private. It's going to be slightly lower, but you're probably more in line with the small animal just because the small animal is reasonable, and that's kind of seen across industries. Um, but yeah, as I said, I don't want to delve too much in equine because that's said I've only dabbled in it, and I've kind of stayed away with it because it's something you really want to be. Someone should be far more expert. Now, if it's part of, we do see what we call a mix, then that helps. If you're predominantly small animal, you do some equine or some large animal, then you kind of get blended in. And that's a different thing as opposed to equine only. Let's see, do we have any?
Okay, does anyone have any other questions? Okay, well, I want to thank you all again for attending tonight. Again, please visit our website and our Learning Center to get more resources on this topic and others. For those of you that submitted your license information for CE credit, you can expect to receive a certificate via email within the next 2 weeks. Thank you again for all of your excellent questions, and we hope that you can join us again for our next An Hour with the Expert webinar, which will be in May. In the interim, if you have any questions, please feel free to follow up via email or on our website. Thank you all so much and have a great night.